Hyundai's Kona Electric has played a significant role in the expansion of the EV market since this model's introduction in 2018, hence the importance of this updated design. Cabin quality and connectivity take a big step forward, and with the top version, driving range is still class-leading. Plenty to like then.
No manufacturer is more invested in the whole concept of clean automotive mobility than Hyundai. The brand has mild hybrid, full hybrid, plug-in hybrid and even hydrogen fuel cell options in its current range. And of course some full electric battery-powered EV models too. Here's perhaps the most familiar of them, the Kona Electric, first launched in 2018, then significantly updated 2 years on to create the car we're going to look at here. When the automotive history books come to be written on the period in which EV motoring got underway, the Nissan-Renault Alliance Group might well get plaudits for introducing the first mass-market models, the Nissan Leaf and the Renault Zoe. But it's arguably the Hyundai Motor Group who should get the credit for really popularising the segment with the launch of two models in 2018, the Kia e-Niro and the original version of this, Kona Electric. Back then, it was pretty unusual for a car of this size to be available in a variant that gave you up to 300 miles between charges. Come to think of it, it's still pretty unusual. But of course, since this car's market introduction, other brands have piled into this segment, that for the more affordable family hatch-sized EVs. Some of them family hatches, some of them super minis, and some like this car with a leaning toward the crossover genre. Nissan's Leaf is still a major player in this part of the market, but now increasingly so are German-engineered contenders like the Volkswagen ID.3 and the Skoda Enyaq iV. Mind you, the Kona Electric features quite a bit of German engineering too, and looks significantly more class competitive following the wide-ranging package of updates that created the car we're going to test here, embellished with smarter looks and a rejuvenated cabin full of digital connectivity. So, where does this model now sit in this uber-competitive segment? You'll need the industry's most comprehensive test film, the Car and Driving Review, in order to find out. Hyundai hasn't made any changes to the engineering or the powertrain of this improved Kona Electric, but since that original model was only on sale for only 2 years, we're going to assume a lack of familiarity here, which will certainly be the case if you never happen to have driven an electric car before. It's fortunate then that this Korean EV is pretty easy to adjust to. The only really unfamiliar thing is the need to use transmission buttons on the centre console, just like on an Aston Martin. These ones, though, are for the single-speed auto gearbox that all EVs have to have. You'll need to adjust to the silence when you push this starter button too, and to what happens when you merely brush the accelerator to initiate forward motion. The way this car hurls itself away from rest is pretty surprising the first time you experience it. But once you understand the drive dynamics here, though, the rush of blood to the head that this Hyundai gets every time you press the loud pedal with any real vigour is only to be expected. There's a lot more pulling power than would be generated by an equivalent combustion engine, 395 newton meters of torque, and all of it's delivered to you right from the get-go, rather than building as it would do with a fossil-fueled power plant. Some of our colleagues in the media have implied that this throws the Kona Electric off course in a somewhat wayward fashion, a bit like the torque steer on poorly developed hot hatches of the 80s, in which you could change lanes merely by stamping on the throttle. Actually, that is a huge exaggeration. There's certainly no doubt that the front wheels of this car struggle to channel its prodigious reserves of torque to the tarmac, not helped by eco-formulated Michelin tyres developed for low rolling resistance rather than grip. But all you actually feel is a slight pull on the steering wheel and a brief chirp of the stability systems as the Kona catapults itself forward with the kind of pace you'd expect from a powerful hot hatch. Like all electric cars, it runs out of puff pretty soon after that, mind you. At which point you realise that driving the car in this way is somewhat ridiculous. Not least because the energy you've just pointlessly used is probably going to take an extra half hour's worth of charging replenishment. Just how much charging replenishment will depend to some extent on the version of this model that you've chosen. There are actually two. The Kona electric range kicks off with the 39 kilowatt-hour variant we're trying here, which uses a 136 PS electric motor and offers the kind of rather compact battery size that's becoming increasingly rare in the EV segment as competing manufacturers strive to improve drive range figures. In this form, the car manages 189 miles from a single charge, which pales in comparison with the 300-mile WLTP rated figure that's claimed for the 64 kilowatt-hour version you'd probably rather have, the one the vast majority of customers will choose, which uses a beefier 204 PS motor. That range increase is enough to make the Kona electric an everyday usable proposition in a way that earlier Hyundai EVs simply weren't. You're going to need to adjust to a slightly different style of driving, mind you, to maximise the distance you can travel between charges, which primarily means management of the energy regenerative process that kicks in when you come off the throttle. Like some other EVs, this one provides you with paddle shifters behind the steering wheel that allow you to either intensify or reduce the regenerative braking feel, in this case through 3 stages. Select stage 3 and you'll hardly ever have to use the brake pedal at all. And in fact, you can actually bring the car to a complete stop just by pulling on the steering wheel paddle. Something less common on an EV, though, is any kind of system to automise the regenerative process based on traffic flow. That's what this Kona's smart regenerative braking system does, using the safety system radar sensor to constantly calculate the optimum level of braking regeneration based on the positioning of the vehicles ahead. When you set off in this Kona, it defaults to the auto system, which delivers a slightly strange brake pedal feel and what can sometimes seem like slightly abrupt levels of retardation until you adjust to the way the setup works and learn to trust it. We've preferred to deactivate the smart system, which you can do via this right-hand steering wheel button, and use the paddle shifters instead. A more familiar EV feature is that for creating artificial noise to warn those on the pavement of your approach in urban areas. This VESS button down to the right of the steering wheel activates the virtual external sound system in question, and it works up to 15 miles an hour. It's not very loud and would probably be drowned out on busier urban streets, but at least it shows that automotive engineers are thinking of the possible dangers that battery-powered vehicles pose to deaf or visually impaired pedestrians. Given the speed at which this one can suddenly appear out of nowhere, rest to 62 miles an hour takes 9.9 seconds in the 39 kilowatt-hour version, and just 7.9 seconds in this 64 kilowatt-hour variant, that's all welcome. Around town you might sometimes struggle with rear over-the-shoulder vision in this car, hence the need for the standard reversing camera. But manoeuvrability is as agile as it would be in any ordinary Kona. Despite the absence of a sizable internal combustion engine, the car's turning circle remains unchanged at 10.6 metres. Get beyond the city limits onto twisting secondary roads and you'll be in territory where an electric vehicle would usually be far less in its comfort zone. Because of the hefty battery packs they have to cart about, EVs usually battle big time with weight. That means the need for firm suspension to stop the car from wallowing about through the bends, which means in turn that you feel every bump and ripple in the road. This one has weight issues too. At almost 1.7 tonnes, it's nearly 300 kilos heavier than a conventional Kona model. But Hyundai has managed that bulk effectively, first by spreading it out evenly across the floor plan, so lowering the centre of gravity. And second, by incorporating the suppler, more sophisticated independent rear suspension setup you don't get on ordinary mild hybrid versions of the conventional Kona. It isn't a perfect solution. You still feel deeper potholes and sharper speed humps more keenly than we'd like, but it's certainly an improvement on the EV market norm, and it contributes to cornering composure at speed that's much better than we expected it would be. It's just a pity that the electric steering is so relatively feel-free. On the highway, the relative quietness of the driveline means that you particularly notice tyre and wind noise, and even things like the wiper motor and the ventilation fan. The acceleration on offer starts to thin out very noticeably once you get beyond 65 miles an hour, a characteristic that could do with being set a touch higher to fit in with a more usual national limit. Of course, you won't often be approaching the top speed capability, or at least you won't if you want to preserve anything like a reasonable driving range figure anyway. But for the record, it's 96 miles an hour for this 39 kilowatt hour version and 104 miles an hour for the 64 kilowatt hour variant. Another way of quickly depleting your travelling distance between charges is to select the most urgent of the 3 driving modes on offer, Sport, which gives you noticeably quicker throttle response and bathes the instrument dials ahead of you in an orange glow. You'll try it once, then stay in the other 2 settings, Eco and Normal, for most of the time after that. Perhaps with one eye on the energy flow graphic you can select to appear to the right of the speedo to show you at any given time what's being powered or charged by what. There's also a winter mode, selectable from the EV menu on the centre screen, that softens the power delivery to make driving in slippery conditions easier. As in any EV, there are lots of screen options to allow you to plan your route around your remaining available charge, or to engage in partly justified smugness at the extent of your eco-friendliness in comparison to combustion-engined travel. This one, though, delivers more where it matters. If you buy it, you probably won't ever exactly replicate that 300-mile driving range figure we quoted earlier for the 64 kilowatt-hour variant, but there's the potential to regularly get in the right kind of ballpark between charges, which is what matters. And what makes this an EV that many families will want to consider? For them, the future starts right here. This improved Kona Electric has emerged from this midterm update looking a little smarter and more gym-toned than before, though, as so often with midterm updates, you might initially be scratching your head a little to establish exactly why. Possibly it's because it's now a little more obviously an EV, the kind of thing the market these days clearly seems to want. Hyundai has long understood this preference. Its very first mass-produced electric vehicle, the Ioniq Electric of 2016, had a distinct look, but this Kona Electric proved to be a much more complete interpretation of the EV concept. In this, it was aided by its high-riding SUV design, which enabled its batteries to be packaged in more easily without affecting cabin space, as usual in an EV, spread across the floor pan for a low centre of gravity. Come in search of the changes made here, and most are to be found up front. Now, there's no pretense at a grille. Previously, there was a perforated front panel. Hyundai wants you to know without any question that this is an EV, hence the rather curious decision to try and make a frontward feature out of this charging port flap. More successful are the changes made to the upper LED daytime running lights and these now sleeker headlamp pods, the beams now embellished with multifaceted reflector technology. Meanwhile, a functional air intake in the lower bumper is visually enhanced by horizontal satin accent bars, which aim to give the car a more pronounced stance. From the side, the look is much as it was before, though if you were to get your tape measure out, you'd find this updated design to be 25mm longer than its predecessor. As before, the sizing places this car somewhere between the i20 Super Mini and the i30 hatch in the brand's model portfolio. With this improved Kona Electric, perhaps the main profile change is that Hyundai's ditched the ghastly wheel design you had to have with the original model, which looked like a plastic wheel trim but wasn't, though the now much smarter alloy rims remain 17 inches in size. As before, the key styling feature is this rather unusual mid-level styling crease, which rises up from just below the door mirror before flowing back above the handles and easing into the power-packed rear C-pillar. Lower down, a further sill-level swage line gives the flanks some shape. The lower side skirts and wheel arch cladding remain unique to this model, and these black roof rails are standard. Sadly, though, it's no longer possible to have a contrast-coloured roof. Move to the rear, and if you happen to be familiar with the original model, you might notice these more horizontally stretched tail lamps. These lower lamp clusters are different too, and are no longer framed with ugly dark cladding. Everything now colour-coded, more harmonious, and much the better for it. A bit of dark cladding remains around the bumper's horizontally ribbed central section, and as before, a neat roof spoiler with an integrated stoplight tops things off. Time to take a seat at the wheel. It's actually not that much different in here, but it feels as if it is because the screen technology's taken such a step. The original car felt very much like an EV from an earlier era with its analogue dials and centre screen technology that maxed out at 8 inches. But forget about that now, because with this revised model, every variant gets a digital instrument cluster and this big 10.25-inch widescreen navigation infotainment setup, complete with a whole range of BlueLink connectivity functions. There's also a classier ambient lighting system and the choice of one-tone black or two-tone grey trimming packages, all of it really lifting cabin ambience. Yes, the silver trim on the door pulls, the air vents, surrounds and the lower part of the steering wheel still feel a bit cheap, but overall a decent improvement has been made. The original version of this model didn't really feel like a £35,000 car from behind the wheel. In this form, you might be a little more convinced. The cabin differences over an ordinary Kona are actually more pronounced than you might expect, the key change being the installation of this wider aircraft-style, silver-trimmed centre console, which incorporates the shift-by-wire push-button controls for the single-speed auto gearbox that all EV models have to have. As before, you're not sat particularly commandingly in what is supposed to be an SUV, but up front here, you're favoured with this pair of unexpectedly cushy pews that with this mid-range trim feature static-inducing fabric upholstery, but should allow all shapes and sizes to get comfortable. They position you comfortably in front of a grippy, four-spoke, leather-trimmed, multi-function steering wheel that's just the right thickness. Through this, you view that virtual dial screen we mentioned. Hyundai calls this 10.25-inch TFT display its driver's supervision instrument cluster, which sounds quite grand, but actually isn't, because it can't offer a full screen width GPS map viewing option. You get these two virtual dials, which change in colour depending on the drive mode selected. The right-hand charge and power meter replacing the usual rev counter. A central section of the screen sits above a meter showing your real-time miles per kilowatt-hour energy consumption and is customisable in 4 sections via steering wheel buttons. The first can show navigation arrows or a compass, and secondly there's a drive assist menu with speed limit info, camera safety stuff and an attention level indicator showing when you took your last break. Thirdly, there's a car menu which offers the choice of an energy flow monitor to show how the EV system's working, or a digital speedo and trip computer data. And finally, an info section has tyre pressure readouts. Everything else you might need to know can be found on this centre screen, the 10.25-inch widescreen navigation infotainment monitor we mentioned earlier, which brings something of a big car feel to this ambitious little crossover. As usual, with Hyundai monitors of this sort, there are clear, neat graphics and helpfully large lower shortcut buttons, though we'd ideally also like to have seen the brand incorporate the kind of useful lower iDrive style controller that you'd get in a rival Mazda MX-30. As usual with Hyundai Group models, this central display has two main home screen pages. One simple uncluttered one with temperature, audio and navigation info, or you can swipe across to a display full of little icons, all of which can be moved about to your preferences, much like your phone. You can also create a split screen format, say with EV and audio info. However you choose to view, there's lots of really neat stuff here, though the voice recognition is a bit patchy, and the phone projection Apple CarPlay or Android Auto smartphone projection system isn't yet of the wireless kind. But on the plus side, all variants get a very high quality 8-speaker Krell premium audio system, and navigation routes are calculated using a powerful server located in a BlueLink cloud, which is continually updating itself with charging station locations. And on that subject, there's a comprehensive EV section for your charging regime with a beautifully concise home screen that tells you at a glance pretty much everything you really need to know. Other centre screen features include voice memo, so you can dictate to the car as you drive, a quiet mode that restricts the volume of the stereo speakers and plays audio output only through the front ones so the kids can get to sleep on longer trips, and a sounds of nature section that'll pipe soothing natural sounds into the cabin as you drive, like snowy village, lively forest and calm ocean waves, all rather nice. We're not sure why you'd want the rather miserable soundtrack of either rainy day or open air cafe, while warm fireplace delivers the rather unnerving feeling that something up front has ignited. On the subject of cabin temperature, climate controls, thankfully, have been separated out into this little silver-keyed panel just below the central vents, though there is also a climate icon on the centre screen, which links you through to Hyundai's usual and very useful auto dehumidify and auto defog functions. What else? Well, it's easy to find a comfortable driving position thanks to lots of wheel and seat adjustment, and the fact that the pedals line up neatly with that wheel. Frontward visibility is fine too, thanks to thin A-pillars that help you at junctions and roundabouts. However, as is often the case in cars of this sort, your rearward vision is compromised by the highly stylised rear end with its thick pillars and small rear screen. Hyundai is apparently aware of this, which is why rear parking sensors and a rear view camera come as standard across the range. And cabin practicality? Well, you get a bit more of that in this electric model under this broad centre console. In a combustion engined Kona, routing space is required underneath this console for the linkages between the mechanical gearshift and the transmission. Take that away and you get this huge area of extra lower storage space embellished by a 12-volt port. The top of this console has space for this lidded cubby too, which incorporates a USB-A port and the wireless charging mat that's fitted above base spec. Otherwise, from a stowage point of view, it's much as it would be in any other Kona. So there are twin cup holders by the transmission controls, tiny door pockets with bottle holders and a deep lidded box between the seats that lacks any connectivity ports but has a cubby ahead of it. You also get storage crevices in the door pulls, a large cooled glove box, ticket clips in the sun visors and an overhead compartment for your sunglasses. And in the rear, well, it's in this part of the car that you're likely to be most keenly reminded that you've bought an SUV based on a small car platform rather than that of a family hatchback. The EV market-leading Nissan Leaf is 310mm longer, which is the kind of difference you'd expect to really notice once you take a seat inside. As it turns out, it's not too bad in here for the carriage of two folk, providing they're not especially lanky of leg. If they are, then compromises will need to be made by the front seat occupants in order to be able to accommodate them. The body shell is slightly wider than it would be in a super mini-sized EV like a Renault Zoe or a BMW i3, though not by enough to make the prospect of sharing the back seat with two other adults a particularly comfortable one, despite this relatively low centre transmission tunnel. Six-footers will find their heads brushing the ceiling too. The main issue, though, as you can see, is legroom. There'd be considerably more in a rival Nissan Leaf and a bit more in a Volkswagen ID3. Given the placement of the battery pack beneath the floor, we weren't surprised to find that the seat base here doesn't slide, but it would have been nice if Hyundai had incorporated a reclining backrest. The brand told us it had added charging ports back here as part of this mid-term update, but they don't seem to have appeared as part of the UK spec, a surprising omission. You don't get overhead reading lights either, and there's just this single overhead coat hook on the driver's side. You can, though, tick off seat back storage nets, a couple of ISOFIX child seat mounts for the two outer seats, compact door bins incorporating bottle holders, and a centre armrest with a couple of cup holders. Let's finish with a few words on boot space. Now, the design team's efforts to build in the battery packs in a way that doesn't impinge on carriage capacity hasn't been entirely successful. That's fallen from the 374 litre total you get in a standard Kona to 332 litres here, which leaves you around 100 litres down on the kind of space you'd get in a rival Nissan Leaf, and it's 119 litres less than you'd get from the mechanically identical Kia e-Niro. You won't fit more than 4 carry-on suitcases back here. The smaller rival Renault Zoe can swallow 6 cases and a Nissan Leaf 7. Certainly the space provided here could prove a little limiting if you've a young family or like to engage in the kind of active pursuits that advertising departments seem to usually associate with SUVs. Still, at least the load bay is well shaped, with little intrusion either from the wheel arches or the suspension turrets, and has both a wide opening and a low lip. There's a bag hook and a rather dim light on the left, plus you get a useful cargo net that can be clipped onto these 4 silver tie-down points. The adjustable height boot floor can't be repositioned at a lower level unless you remove this polystyrene compartmentalised compartment below it. Because no space-saver spare wheel is provided, you can't even specify one as an option, there's also a little extra space below that could be used to shield more valuable items from prying eyes. Push forward the 60-40 split folding rear seat and you'll reveal a relatively flat loading floor with as much as 1,114 litres of total fresh air if you load to the roof. Back in 2018, when this car was first launched, what Hyundai's EV competitors were expecting was a fairly straightforward proposition. A government grant deducted on the road price in the £28,000 to £30,000 bracket, battery capacity around 40 kilowatt hours, and just under 200 miles of WLTP rated driving range. And indeed, that's almost precisely what's still delivered by the base 39 kilowatt hour 136 PS version of this Kona Electric, the model we're trying here, which, as before, is offered in 2 guises, SE Connect and this plusher Premium guise, with an extra cost of £1,350 to go from one to the other. What the market wasn't expecting in 2018 was the version of this Kona Electric that most customers now tend to choose, the alternative 64 kilowatt hour 204 PS variant. With that top derivative, there's up to 300 miles of WLTP rated range at pricing which, for this revised model at the time of this test in autumn 2021, began at around £32,500 if you go for a premium trimmed variant. As mentioned, we've been quoting prices that include deduction of the available £2,500 government grant towards EV purchase, but that only applies to models costing under £35,000. A Kona electric 64 kilowatt-hour model with top ultimate spec falls over that threshold, so you're on your own with the asking price there, which at the time of this test was just over £37,000. Let's position the Kona Electric for you in the eco part of the company's lineup. Now, at the time of this test, Hyundai was still selling the old-shape version of its Ioniq Electric, a car powered by basically the same battery you'll find in this base 39 kilowatt-hour Kona Electric. With equivalent trim, that Ioniq Electric retails at around £1,300 more than a comparable 39 kilowatt-hour Kona Electric. You might also be interested in the price differential to Hyundai's other EV offering, the avant-garde Ioniq 5. That car's priced at around £37,000 in base 58 kilowatt-hour form, which will take you only 240 miles on a single charge. So, £4,500 more than the kind of Kona Electric 64 kilowatt-hour model that could take you 60 miles further on every charge. But of course, the Ioniq 5 is a trendier and slightly larger car than this Kona. Depends what you want. Make sure, by the way, that what you want is an EV. For Kona Electric money, the Kia branded side of the Hyundai Motor Group produces the Nero plug-in model, which has an 8.9 kilowatt-hour battery pack that can take you up to 36 miles before its 1.6 litre petrol engine chimes in. Across all brands, you'll probably need some electric vehicle segment perspective here in order to inform any prospective purchase. So we'll try and give it. Again, quoting grant-deducted prices. Try not to glaze over with all the figures, and we'll try and simplify your options as much as is possible. Now, the EV sector's market leader, Nissan's Leaf, is mainly sold in 40 kilowatt-hour form, where it gives you 168 miles of WLTP rated range for prices in the £26,000 to £30,000 bracket. Or, if you can stretch up to around £31,000, there's an E-Plus Leaf variant with a 62 kilowatt-hour battery that goes up to 239 miles. Because a Leaf is family hatch sized, it probably makes slightly more sense than its closest rival, the super mini sized Renault Zoe, which in its highest output form offers you a 52 kilowatt-hour battery pack with a 242 mile driving range and costs from around £31,000, though can be cheaper with a smaller battery pack. That's about the same price as you'll pay for the standard version of the similarly sized BMW i3, which has a 42.2 kilowatt-hour battery pack, but a much lower range of about 191 miles. We haven't yet mentioned, though, two key EV models in this class that most potential Kona Electric customers will have on their radars. The first is a car that shares virtually all of its engineering with this Hyundai, the Kia e-Niro, which costs around £2,000 more than a Kona Electric in 39 kilowatt-hour form, but retails at about the same price in base 64 kilowatt-hour guise. The other EV you'll probably have in mind in this class is the Volkswagen ID3, which costs a similar amount to cheaper versions of this Hyundai in base ID3 45 kilowatt-hour and 58 kilowatt-hour guises, but isn't much good if you want to match the long range of the Kona Electric in 64 kilowatt-hour form. For that, you'll need an ID3 with Volkswagen's largest 77 kilowatt-hour battery, prices for which start right up at around £39,000. Other segment competitors are slightly more difficult to match against what's on offer here. The Stellantis group has 4 EV contenders, all of which deliver driving range figures at or around the 200-mile mark. There's the city car-shaped Fiat 500 EV, priced from around £26,000 in comparable 42 kilowatt-hour form, but with so little space in the back that it makes this Kona feel like a limo. Or there's the super mini-sized Vauxhall Corsa E and the Peugeot E208, which both sell in the £26,000 to £31,000 bracket. Those two use the same 50 kilowatt-hour battery you'll also find in Citroen's quirky EC4, which has a 217-mile range, sells in the £31,000 to £33,000 bracket, and size-wise is more directly comparable to this Hyundai, but can't be had with a larger, longer-range battery. That only leaves the really fashion-led contenders in this segment. You could easily spend the kind of money Hyundai's asking here on the three trendiest choices in this sector: the Mini Electric, the Mazda MX-30 and the Honda E, all pitched from around £27,000. But those three contenders all use small batteries that give you small driving ranges. And they're all super mini sized, so pretty small inside too. Those are all the key players in the affordable part of the EV market. Now, having considered them, let's say you're convinced by what's on offer here and want to know just how generous has Hyundai been with the standard spec. Well, let's see. All the key electric drive elements come fitted, of course, throughout the range. The single-speed, push-button auto transmission, regenerative brake shift paddles and a drive mode selector with a choice of settings. There's a battery heater to preserve range in the winter months and a CCS combo rapid charge port for a 50 kilowatt feed. Oh, and two charging cables, a 7-pin Type 2 lead and a 3-pin socket connector. We should also talk media, and specifically the new widescreen navigation setup with its 10.25-inch screen that all Kona electric models now get. It comes with sat-nav, an 8-speaker Krell premium audio system, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, smartphone projection, smartphone mirroring, Bluetooth and dynamic voice recognition system voice control. Plus, a voice memo feature so you can dictate to the car as you drive, a quiet mode that restricts the volume of the stereo speakers and plays audio output only through the front ones so the kids can get to sleep on longer trips, and a sounds of nature section that'll pipe soothing natural sounds into the cabin as you drive. Choose from warm fireplace, snowy village, lively forest, calm ocean waves, rainy day or open-air cafe. More importantly, there's an extremely sophisticated navigation system which is updated with Hyundai's MapCare service, and as part of the changes made to this updated model can work with a clever cloud-based BlueLink connected routing feature. This sees driving routes calculated on a powerful server located in a BlueLink cloud, which allows for more accurate traffic forecasting, more precise times of arrival and more reliable route recalculation. This works with incorporated Hyundai Live services. A 5-year subscription to these comes included in the price, which alert you to speed cameras and provide accurate information on traffic jams and roadworks. Staying with BlueLink technology, the central screen has a BlueLink connectivity section offering a calendar, weather reports and vehicle diagnostics menus. And of course there's an app. There's always an app, isn't there? Which predictably, in this case, is called Hyundai BlueLink. Once it's downloaded onto your smartphone, you can use it to manage your charging regime and locate the nearest charging station. It'll also precondition the climate system so that the cabin will be pre-warmed or pre-cooled before you get into it. An addition with this revised model is the last mile navigation feature that'll take you on foot to your ultimate destination if you have to park the car a little way from it, as in a busy city, for instance. Plus, of course, this app will do all the usual things that manufacturer model apps tend to do these days. You can send destinations from your PC to your car, you'll be able to remotely lock or unlock the vehicle, and you'll be advised if the alarm goes off. Using the app via your phone, you can also access maintenance info on your Kona Electric, send places of interest data to the navigation system, and use the Find My Car feature to find the vehicle in a crowded car park if you've forgotten where you put it. Those then are the general features that all Kona electric variants get. Now let's get specific with trim levels. Now, starting with the base SE Connect spec that applies only to the entry-level 39 kilowatt-hour version of this model. Here you get 17-inch alloy wheels, auto headlamps with LED daytime running lights, roof rails and front fog lamps, plus rear parking sensors, keyless entry and a rear parking camera. Plus a package of useful camera-driven safety items we'll cover in a minute. Inside, in an SE Connect spec model, you get climate-controlled air conditioning, driver's seat lumbar support, and a leather-wrapped steering wheel. There's also a smart adaptive cruise control system that can regulate your distance to the vehicle in front on the highway, and includes a stop-and-go function that can, if necessary, even slow you down to a stop and seamlessly start you off again if you come across a tailback. Here, though, we've stretched up to the mid-range premium trim level a Kona electric customer is more likely to want, because it gives you a choice of the two available battery sizes. With premium spec, you can expect full LED headlights, automatic wipers, rear privacy glass, LED tail lamps, solar glass, front parking sensors, power folding mirrors, and some extra camera-driven safety kit. Inside, at this level, there's heated front seats, an auto-dimming rear view mirror, a new ambient lighting system, and a wireless phone charging pad. Ideally, though, you'd want to buy in at the top of the range, get the gutsiest 64 kilowatt-hour version, and equip it up to plush ultimate spec. Though, as we suggested earlier, you're not that likely to want to do this, as the asking figure at this level won't be subsidised by a government grant. Ultimate trim gets you niceties like high beam assist for the headlights, plus static cornering lights and a powered sunroof. Inside, there's leather upholstery that's ventilated at the front, powered front seats, heated rear seats, a head-up display, and a heated steering wheel. So much for the standard stuff. What about options? Well, there aren't many. Before considering them, make sure that if you're new to the world of EV motoring, you budget the extra you're going to need to install a charging wall box in your garage. Hyundai offers a 7 kilowatt home charge package in partnership with PodPoint, which will cost you £300 once you've subtracted the available £500 government OLEV, or Office for Low Emission Vehicles, grant. And beyond that, well, bear in mind that, rather appallingly, all the available paint colours cost extra. Even the two solid ones, Atlas White and Ignite Red, which will set you back another £300. Beyond that, you're going to have to be forking out for one of the metallic or pearl shades, a number of which are new to this revised lineup, including the surfy blue metallic shade we have here. It's no longer possible to specify a contrast coloured roof. As for the inside, well, opt for top ultimate trim and you'll be able to exercise the no-cost option of a grey two-tone with grey leather interior package that lifts the feel of the otherwise quite sombre black one-tone trimmed cabin quite a bit. Well, let's finish by looking at this car from a safety perspective. Now, over 50% of the body is fashioned from ultra-high strength steel and features a ring-shaped cabin structure that disperses crush energy in various directions in the event of a collision, reducing the consequences of an impact for passengers. And to build on this, Hyundai claims to have considerably improved its SmartSense package of camera safety features for this Kona, and to now offer what it calls the most comprehensive safety package in the segment. Close inspection of the small print, though, reveals that, as usual, the choicest elements only appear with the priciest trim levels. Still, all Kona electrics meet the class standard in this regard, which means, of course, that an autonomous emergency braking setup comes as standard. Hyundai's system is called forward collision avoidance and includes pedestrian detection. It's the usual setup which, as you drive, scans the road ahead, searching for potential collision hazards. If one's detected, you'll be warned, and if you don't respond or aren't able to, the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. The other noteworthy standard fit camera-driven feature is the lane keep assist setup. It'll warn you if the car's unintentionally wandering over a road marking before gently steering your Kona back to where it ought to be. There's also driver attention alert, which monitors your driving reactions for drowsiness, and LFA, or lane follow assist, which uses smart sensors and the car's forward-facing camera to detect when your Kona drifts from the centre of its lane. The LFA system then applying steering torque to maintain safe road positioning, while the car also estimates the trajectory of the vehicle ahead and adjusts its position accordingly. For heavy traffic, there's a clever leading vehicle departure alert feature which ensures that in a queue, when the vehicle in front moves off, so will you. Another clever safety feature we particularly like is rear seat alert, which monitors the rear seats using an ultrasonic sensor that helps to detect the movements of children. The system first reminds drivers to check the rear seats when exiting the vehicle with a message on the centre instrument cluster display. If the system detects movement in the rear seats after the driver leaves their Kona, it will honk the horn, flash the lights and send a Blue Link alert to the driver's smartphone via the Blue Link connected car system. Believe it or not, tragedies have occurred where children have accidentally locked themselves in a car, or parents have locked children in hot vehicles. Horrifically, in the US alone, more than 800 children have died from heat-related illnesses in vehicles since 1994. And in 55% of these cases, the parent was apparently unaware the child was even in the vehicle. On a really hot day, experts say it only takes a matter of minutes before the heat can overwhelm a child's ability to regulate his or her internal temperature. Their core temperature can increase 3 to 5 times faster than that of an adult. Other camera safety features are a bit more trim specific. With the premium and ultimate spec levels, you also get an intelligent speed limit assist feature, which uses a camera to read speed limit signs along the road, displaying them beside the speedometer and on the navigation screen. You can then decide to set your speed to the road speed limit or override it. There's also blind spot collision avoidance assist, which will stop you from dangerously pulling out in front of another vehicle, if necessary, applying subtle steering lock to discourage you from the manoeuvre. Finally, Ultimate Spec includes 2 additional features. There's rear cross-traffic collision avoidance assist, which alerts you to oncoming traffic when you're reversing out of a space. And for major roads, there's HDA or Highway Driving Assist, which keeps the vehicle at a preset speed and maintains road position in your lane. HDA monitors the distance to the vehicles ahead, reducing speed automatically when the gap closes. And when the safe distance is restored, HDA then resumes the preset cruising speed. That's covered off all the camera safety features for you. Plus, of course, every Kona electric gets a range of more familiar passive safety elements. There are twin front, side and curtain airbags linked to an e-call emergency button system, which will alert the rescue services with your exact GPS location if they go off in a crash. You also get ISOFIX rear child seat fastenings and active front head restraints that prevent whiplash. In addition, as usual with a small SUV of this kind, there's ESC, electronic stability control, tyre pressure monitoring and hill start assist control to stop the car rolling backwards as you pull away on inclines. Plus, downhill brake control eases you down slippery slopes. And as you'd also expect in this segment, the ABS anti-lock brakes are aided in panic stops by a brake assist feature, plus an emergency stop signal that flashes the hazard lights to warn following motorists. It's all very reassuring. The kind of driving range you used to get from early electric vehicles, 60 to 70 miles between charges if you were lucky, seems pretty laughable these days. We've briefed you on the WLTP rated driving range figures earlier in this film, but just in case you haven't yet caught them, this base 39 kilowatt hour version manages 189 miles between charges, while the top 64 kilowatt hour model boosts that figure to 300 miles. You might not be especially impressed by these figures unless you were clued into what's available from other similarly priced volume brand EV rivals, so let's brief you on that. If you were to be looking at this 39 kilowatt hour model, the other EVs you'd probably be considering would be the Nissan Leaf in base 40 kilowatt hour form, which has a range of just 168 miles, the Kia Niro in 39 kilowatt hour form, 180 miles, the BMW i3, which manages 191, an MG ZS EV in 51 kilowatt hour guise, which manages 198, and a base Volkswagen ID3, which in 45 kilowatt hour form manages up to 217 miles. Possibly also the Vauxhall Corsa E, the Peugeot E208 and the Citroën EC4, which all record figures just over the 200-mile mark. EVs with range figures that fall somewhere between the two Kona electric models include the Renault Zoe, which in 52 kilowatt-hour form has a 242-mile driving range, the Nissan Leaf E Plus 62 kilowatt-hour variant, which goes up to 239 miles, and the volume Volkswagen ID.3 58 kilowatt-hour model, which goes up to 260 miles. If you're looking at the top Kona electric 64 kilowatt-hour with its 300-mile range, the rivals you need to have in mind will be the MG ZS EV in 72 kilowatt-hour form, which goes up to 273 miles, the Kia e-Niro 64 kilowatt-hour up to 282, and the Volkswagen ID.3 in its pricier 77 kilowatt-hour form up to 342 miles. But for that Volkswagen, you'd be up towards the £40,000 price point that would open up a whole fresh set of EV rivals, more accurately targeted by Hyundai's larger Ioniq 5 EV. In testing electric cars at Car and Driving, we've often tended to take driving range figures with a rather large pinch of salt. This one's different. In our testing, we found it relatively easy to get within 20 miles or so of the quoted official figures, which is more than we've managed in rivals like the i3, the Leaf or the Zoe. If the top 64 kilowatt-hour version of this car was used with a modicum of restraint, we've no difficulty in believing that around 250 miles would be regularly possible between charges, which is the kind of figure we sometimes struggle to get from really pricey Tesla models. Of course, to maximise your driving range, you're going to need to make copious use of the various driving aids Hyundai provides. You'll obviously need to keep the car frequently in its most frugal eco driving mode. Plus, there's a power meter driving gauge to the right of the instrument binnacle. And the idea here is to keep the needle in the blue charge band as often as possible. At the bottom of the binnacle screen, there's also a band showing your average mile per kilowatt hour energy consumption in real time. Your other key to maximising efficiency is to effectively harvest regenerative braking energy, which sounds complicated but actually isn't. These paddles behind the wheel allow you to dial in so much braking energy that the car will almost stop on its own. But that won't do much for the smoothness of your everyday progress, so you'll have to balance that against your driving range expectations. Alternatively, the car can look after the whole regeneration thing for you with auto recuperation software that uses the car's radar transceiver to constantly measure the distance to the vehicle in front. It's a system that sometimes feels rather jerky, so you might find it better to switch it off and decide on your own settings via the paddles. You'll also be using the EV section of the centre dash touchscreen rather a lot. There's a home screen showing a little map with a driving range, plus battery percentage, charge and AC and DC charging limits. An EV route screen shows your available range, destination and charging points with a journey line along your intended route. And finally, if you want to feel smug as you survey other road users, you can switch to an eco contribution screen that shows you the CO2 reduction you've achieved compared to a petrol-powered car of similar size. A fuel economy history section shows you in miles per kilowatt hour how much this has varied over your recent journeys. We should get on to charging issues. You can rapid charge at up to 77 kilowatts with a 64 kilowatt hour model, filling the battery using a 100 kilowatt public charger from 10 to 80% in 48 minutes. This 39 kilowatt hour model can do the same thing at a 50 kilowatt charger in 47 minutes. Plugged into a typical 7 kilowatt garage wall box, this 39 kilowatt hour model charges from empty to 100% in 6 hours. For the 64 kilowatt hour model, it's 9 hours and 15 minutes. Plugging into a 3-pin domestic 220 volt 12 amp socket obviously takes a lot longer. 17 hours from 10 to 100% for this 39 kilowatt hour model, and a yawning 28 hours for the 64 kilowatt hour variant. Remember that your home's cheap off-peak electricity allowance is likely to be for no more than around 6 hours, so it'll be important to use the EV screen's charge management menu or use the Charge My Hyundai app so that you can charge efficiently, then not waste energy with excessive climate system use once you get underway. By the way, the car also offers a useful utility mode, which will allow the high voltage battery to power electronic devices connected to the vehicle, say lights or a small fridge when you're camping, for instance. On to issues of tax, aided here, as with every EV, by this car's quoted 0 gram per kilometre, zero emissions CO2 reading. Of course, in the real world, the whole zero emissions thing is fictitious when you take into account the emissions impact of the power station energy generation needed to power this car. Its well-to-wheels emission figure actually works out at 62 grams per kilometre. But the government believes the EV zero emissions mantra, which means there's no first-year road tax licence to pay, saving you a useful few hundred quid, and you won't ever be saddled with inner-city congestion charges. Well, not until 2025 anyway. More significantly, your company benefit-in-kind tax rating will be pitched at just 1%, which at the time of this test meant an annual payment from around £122 annually for higher rate 40% earners, or from around £61 for lower rated earners, which is massively less than you'd pay for a similarly sized and powered combustion engine model, even an electrified one. To give you some perspective on that, we'll tell you that an ordinary Kona 1 litre mild hybrid model is BIK rated at 30%, with the full hybrid Kona model BIK rated at 25 or 26%. As for your warranty, well, it's the usual comprehensive Hyundai deal, a 5-year unlimited mileage package that comes as standard. It's backed up by breakdown cover that lasts the same length of time and free annual vehicle health checks over this duration. True, rival brand Kia claims to better this package by offering a similar 7-year deal, but there you're limited to 100,000 miles. There's an 8-year or 125,000 mile warranty on the battery, and should you run out of charge and find yourself stuck by the roadside, there's 3 years of emergency assistance included that'll help you to the nearest working charging point. You can extend this cover to 5 years at a minimal extra cost. Maintenance will obviously be cheaper than it would be for a combustion engined model. An electric vehicle does, after all, have 20% fewer moving parts. Service intervals on a Kona Electric are every 2 years or every 20,000 miles, whichever comes first, with an annual health check every 12 months. Hyundai offers 2 prepaid service plans for this model. One is for 3 years and 30,000 miles. The other is for 5 years and 40,000 miles. There's a useful vehicle diagnostics display within the car's centre screen Blue Link menu that allows you to check in real time on steering, brakes, tyres and camera safety equipment. If you're wondering about residual values, well, these will vary depending on future market take-up of EVs. At the moment, any electric vehicle will shed its value faster than a conventional petrol or diesel model, but that state of affairs could change very quickly as prevailing public opinion is shaped by the media. Independent experts reckon that after 3 years and 60,000 miles, a mid-spec Kona Electric 64 kilowatt-hour would probably still be worth around £14,000 at the end of this period. Over what would be a more realistic 3-year or 30,000 mile ownership span for an EV, the figure would be closer to £16,000. You might be a bit shocked by the insurance groupings here if you're moving over from a combustion model. Insurance groupings are high with any EV, mainly because brokers worry about the increased cost of accident repair with electric vehicles and the possible need to replace the entire drive system battery if you were to be involved in a collision. A 39 kilowatt-hour SE Connect model is rated at Group 20A or Group 21A in premium trim. The 64 kilowatt-hour version is rated at Group 24A in both its trim levels. And what about the green issues? Well, lithium-ion batteries aren't recyclable in the way that the fuel cells used in hydrogen-powered vehicles are. Currently, when EV vehicles are reaching the end of their lives, the batteries are being reused as electricity storage buffers. After that, though, they can't simply be scrapped because lithium-ion has explosive elements. So these batteries are currently simply being buried in landfills. Gradually, recycling plants are being introduced to try and resolve this issue. But whether there'll be enough of these to deal with the glut of EVs likely to be reaching the end of their lives in 10 to 15 years' time is quite another question. If landfills are still being used by then, we'll all be in a pretty unsustainable situation. But then the pollution caused by combustion power is obviously unsustainable too. If you see the EV solution as the lesser of two evils, and your purchase of a battery-powered model must be contained within reasonable budget, we think it's difficult to ignore this one. Hyundai seems to specialise in game-changing design. The iX35 FCEV was the world's first mass-market hydrogen-powered car. The Ioniq was the first model with 3 different electric powertrains in one body type. The i30N hot hatch changed the shape of the shopping rocket segment. And this Kona electric has revolutionised what we can expect from an affordable electric car. There's nothing particularly groundbreaking about the components of this mid-term update, but it isn't so long since we were calling this car revolutionary in its ability to deliver the kind of relatively usable driving range that would make it almost usable as an only car. That's with the 64 kilowatt-hour version. Even with this lesser 39 kilowatt-hour model, it helps that the claimed range isn't so far away from what's actually achievable in everyday use. Unlike most other commentators, we also like the fact that its drive dynamics have a bit of character. Yes, you have to be a little careful with the throttle away from rest, but it's actually quite fun to work around that. At the time of our original test of this car back in 2018, what we had more of an issue with was the rather uninspiring cabin. But Hyundai has listened and things are now much improved with an impressive helping of 10.25-inch screen technology. That only leaves the fact that there's significantly less rear passenger space and boot capacity than you'd expect to get from a car of this price. We can expect the next generation model to address that problem. In a Volkswagen ID.3, you'd get a more futuristic interior. In a Nissan Leaf, you'd get more rear seat passenger space. But both those cars are completely trounced by the driving range this Kona electric can offer in its higher output form, which is something that only this car's Kia cousins can match for the price. The opposition, though, is catching up, hence the need for this car to step up its game. It has, which is why if you're searching for an EV at this price point, it's still one you can't afford to ignore.